Welcome back to Montgomery. I actually want to start today's deep dive by asking you to do something a little different.
Oh, all right. I'm intrigued.
I want you to mentally transport yourself to the very first 20 minutes of your day. You wake up, you stumble out of bed, and you head straight to the bathroom. You turn on the shower, and you step in.
Ah, yes, the morning ritual. For a lot of us, that's the absolute sanctuary.
Exactly right. For most of us, it's the only time of day where we are truly, completely alone. It feels safe. It feels clean.
Yeah.
You grab that bottle of body wash. Maybe it's bright blue. Maybe it smells like ocean breeze or cucumber melon.
Yeah.
You scrub down.
Yeah.
You shampoo. You condition.
Yep, and then you get out, you towel off, you swipe on some deodorant, maybe rub in some lotion, maybe a little face cream.
It's completely automatic. We don't even think about it.
We really don't.
But today, we are going to stop the tape right there. We're going to freeze frame that exact moment in the shower, and we're going to look at it through a completely different lens. Because according to the massive stack of research we have on the desk today, that sanctuary is, it's actually a chemistry lab. And quite frankly, it might be a battlefield.
It is absolutely a battlefield. And unfortunately, the casualty in this particular war is very often your own skin. I mean, we tend to treat our bodies like a car hood, right? Something you just scrub the dirt off of and then wax to make it shiny.
Right, just hose it down.
Exactly. But looking at the data we're diving into today, from dermatological studies on medical students to major endocrine disruption interventions, it turns out our skin is actually this incredibly high-maintenance living ecosystem. It has its own climate, it has its own economy, and we might just be napalming it every single morning without even realizing it.
And that is the core tension we are exploring today.
Yeah.
We have this invisible layer on our skin called the acid mantle, which, by the way, sounds like a sci-fi force field.
It really does.
And honestly, after reading the notes, it kind of is a force field. So we are going to unpack exactly what that is. We are going to investigate whether our daily soaps are actually destroying that shield.
And we really need to look at the chemical burden, too. We need to talk about what happens when you absorb ingredients like phthalates and parabens and look at the real data, not the internet fear-mongering, but the actual hard numbers on things like aluminum in your deodorant.
We have a really fascinating stack of sources to get us there today. We have a specific dermatological study from Terry Mogu University regarding medical students and their daily soap habits. We've got the famous Hermosa intervention study involving Latina teenagers out in California.
That one is incredible.
It really is. Plus, we've got a deep dive into the surprisingly wild history of deodorant and some eye-opening insights from ingredient safety watchdogs like Clearia and Mobivation.
It's a heavy stack, and I think the best place to start is honestly just acknowledging the sheer volume of what we are dealing with here.
You mean the number of products we're using?
Yeah. When I was looking at the background for the Hermosa study, I actually had to double-check the numbers. Because we assume we use maybe, 3 or 4 things. Soap, shampoo, deodorant. But the average adult woman uses about 12 personal care products every single day.
12. That's a lot of different bottles.
It is, and for teenagers, it's even higher.
Yeah, I saw that.
The study highlighted that teenage girls average 17 products a day. 17 distinct chemical mixtures applied directly to the body every 24 hours.
That is just a staggering amount of chemistry, and I think the assumption we all make, I know I definitely make it, is, it's on the shelf at the drugstore. It must be safe. The government wouldn't let them sell it to me if it was dangerous, right?
And that right there is the single biggest misconception in consumer goods today. We have this comforting idea that there is some master chemist in Washington meticulously checking every single bottle of lotion before it ships.
But there isn't.
Not even close. In reality, the cosmetic industry, especially here in the US, is remarkably under-regulated compared to pharmaceuticals. The FDA doesn't pre-approve cosmetic ingredients in the same way they do prescription drugs.
So they just go straight to the shelf.
Pretty much. The burden of proof is usually on the consumer or on independent researchers to prove harm after the product has already been on the market for years.
Wow. So in a very real sense, we are the beta testers.
We are the long-term clinical trial, and that is exactly why this deep dive is so important. We aren't here to fearmonger. I don't want you to listen to throw out everything in your bathroom and start washing in the backyard with dirt.
Please don't do that.
Right. But we do want to move you from being a passive consumer to an informed chemist. You need to understand the biological reality of what is actually happening when that soap hits your skin.
So let's get right into that biological reality. Section 1. The acid mantle.
The invisible shield.
I have to say I really love this term. The acid mantle. It sounds like specialized armor in a fantasy video game.
Yeah.
But biologically speaking, what exactly are we talking about here?
Well, it's actually not far off from armor. The acid mantle is a very thin, very viscous film that covers the entire surface of the outermost layer of your skin. It is essentially a chemical emulsion
An emulsion of what exactly?
of your body's own natural secretions. So you have sebaceous glands that pump out sebum, that's your natural oil, which is full of fatty acids. And then you have sweat glands that pump out water, lactic acid, and amino acids.
Okay.
When those two things mix together on the surface of the skin, they create this film. And crucially, because of that lactic acid and those fatty acids, the film is slightly acidic.
No, we need to pause on the chemistry here for a second because the word acid usually has a pretty negative connotation. If I spill acid on the kitchen table, it burns a hole in it. Why in the world do we want acid on our face?
This is where we have to bring in the pH scale. We have to remember that the scale goes from 0 to 14. 7 right in the middle is neutral, that's pure water. Anything below 7 is acidic. The lower the number goes, the stronger the acid becomes.
And it's a logarithmic scale, right? Kind of like the Richter scale for earthquakes.
Exactly. That is a vital point to understand. A pH of 5 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 6.
10 times.
Right. And a pH of 4 is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 6. So even really small moves on the number scale represent massive moves in terms of actual chemistry.
So where does the human body sit on this scale?
This is the fascinating dichotomy of human biology. The inside of your body, your blood, your internal tissues needs to be strictly neutral. Your blood pH is tightly regulated right between 7.35 and 7.45.
That is a tiny window.
Very tiny. If your blood drops to 6.8, you are going into a coma. If it goes up to 7.8, you're in tetany. It has to be around 7.4.
Okay, so the inside of us is neutral.
But the outside, the surface of your skin ideally sits between a pH of 4.5 and 5.5.
That is significantly acidic. I mean, that's approaching the acidity of black coffee or even tomato juice.
It is. And there is a very specific evolutionary reason for this. It is a border wall.
A wall against what?
Pathogens. Bacteria, viruses, fungi. Most of the bad bugs, things like Staphylococcus aureus, the bacteria that cause really nasty staph infections, they thrive in a neutral environment. They absolutely love a pH of 7. They replicate fastest there.
Okay.
But they struggle in an acidic environment. They just don't like the acid.
So basically, by keeping our skin acidic, we are intentionally creating a hostile environment for microscopic invaders.
Precisely. It is literal chemical warfare. We are maintaining a climate that our enemies hate. But simultaneously, that acidic climate is absolutely perfect for our friends.
You're talking about the microbiome.
Right. We have trillions of commensal bacteria living on us right now, Staphylococcus epidermidis, for example. And they are adapted to that acid. They help train our immune system, they eat dead skin cells, and they physically crowd out the bad guys so they can't set up camp.
So the acid mantle is essentially the gatekeeper. It's the climate control that decides who gets to live and who dies on your skin.
That's a great way to put it.
That is an incredible system.
Yeah.
But here is where the conflict comes in. We have this delicate acidic force field. And then every single morning, we step into the shower and we introduce soap. Which brings us to this really interesting study from Tarmanagar University.
Yeah, this was a really elegant piece of research just because of how simple and direct it was. They looked at medical students, specifically the class of 2023.
These are people who should theoretically know quite a bit about health and biology.
You would certainly think so. The researchers audited exactly what kind of soap these medical students were using every day, and then they physically measured the hydration levels of their skin.
And the results were pretty telling. They found that 68.1% of the subjects were using alkaline soap.
Which is the vast majority of them. And alkaline in this context means a pH greater than 8, often pushing up to 9 or 10.
So let's just do the math on that for a second. The skin wants to be at a 5.5. The soap is at a 10. And remember, this is a logarithmic scale. That is a massive chemical gap.
It's a complete shock to the system. The study found a direct correlation between the use of that alkaline soap and clinical skin dryness. They actually pinpointed that the legs were the driest area. Almost 49% of the students had, quote-unquote, very dry skin on their lower legs.
Why the legs specifically? Why wouldn't it be the face or the arms?
It's mostly anatomical. The lower legs naturally have far fewer sebaceous glands than the face or the chest or the back, so they produce a lot less natural oil to begin with. They just have a much harder time recovering from a chemical stripping. Plus, we often scrub them heavily and then immediately stick them inside denim jeans or tight synthetic fabrics for the rest of the day, which causes friction.
That makes sense. But the core issue is the chemistry of the soap itself. What is actually happening physically when you put a pH 10 substance onto a pH 5 surface? Is it just changing the number on a scale, or is it physically breaking things?
Oh, it is physically damaging the structure. We really need to visualize how the skin is built. Dermatologists often use what they call the brick and mortar model.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Imagine a brick wall. Your skin cells, the corneocytes, are the bricks. The mortar that holds all those bricks together and seals the gaps is made of lipids, fats, specifically things like ceramides, cholesterol, and fatty acids.
Okay, so fat is literally the glue holding our skin barrier together.
Exactly. Now think about what the primary function of soap is. Why do we use dish soap on a really greasy frying pan?
To break down the fat, to cut through the grease.
Right. Soap is fundamentally an emulsifier. Its entire job is to surround fat molecules, bind to them, and rip them off the surface so that water can wash them down the drain. The problem is a harsh alkaline soap doesn't have a brain. It cannot distinguish between the extra grease from the pizza you ate last night and the vital mortar holding your skin cells together.
Oh, wow. So it just strips the glue entirely.
It literally dissolves the structural lipids right out of the stratum corneum. And when you lose that mortar, you get microscopic cracks in the wall. This leads to a phenomenon we call transepidermal water loss, or TEWL.
Transepidermal water loss.
Yes. The ambient water inside your body literally evaporates out through those microscopic cracks into the air, and worse environmental irritants from the outside can get in through those same cracks. That is the exact clinical definition of dry, itchy, irritated, eczema-prone skin.
You're essentially breaching the hull of the ship every time you lather up.
You are. And when you artificially raise that pH, you are also disabling the specific enzymes that your body uses to repair the wall, and you are actively inviting the bad bacteria to thrive.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second, because human beings have been using soap for a very, very long time. If it was really this dangerous, wouldn't we all just be walking around with severe skin infections and our skin falling off?
That's a completely fair question, and the answer lies in the skin's inherent resilience. The study and the expert commentary we looked at highlight something called buffering capacity.
What exactly is buffering capacity?
It's the skin's ability to bounce back from an assault. If you are generally healthy and you wash your hands with a bar of standard alkaline soap, your skin's pH is going to spike immediately, but your body senses that and will immediately start pumping out more sebum and more sweat to reacidify the surface. In a young, healthy person, the acid mantle can fully repair itself in anywhere from 15 to 90 minutes.
So it's basically a temporary assault. The skin recovers.
Right? It is a stress test. The real problem arises with frequency. If you are standing in a hot shower, scrubbing your entire body with a harsh alkaline soap every single morning, and then maybe you do it again in the evening after the gym and you aren't applying any moisturizer afterward, you are constantly chronically stressing the system. You are knocking the brick wall down much, much faster than the body can ever build it back up. That is when you transition into chronic dermatological issues.
Speaking of the harshness of soap, there was a historical detail in the research regarding traditional soap making that absolutely horrified me. The ZAP test.
Oh, the ZAP test. That is old school frontier chemistry at its absolute finest.
Oh, please explain this to the listeners, because when I read the notes, I could not believe people actually did this on purpose.
So to understand the ZAP test, you have to understand the basic process of saponification. That is the chemical reaction that creates soap. You take a fat, it could be olive oil, tallow, coconut oil, whatever, and you mix it with a highly caustic, strong alkali, usually sodium hydroxide, which is also known as lye.
And lye is dangerous, right? I mean, isn't that essentially drain cleaner?
It is extremely dangerous. It will cause severe chemical burns on contact. But if you do the stoichiometric math correctly, the lye reacts completely with the fat molecules. The lye is fully consumed, the fat is fully consumed, and you are left with two brand new safe things, soap and glycerin.
So in a perfectly formulated bar of soap, there is absolutely no active lye left over.
Correct. But back in the day, long before anyone had cheap digital pH meters or precise scales, how did a frontier soap maker know if they got the chemical ratio right? How did they know there wasn't a pocket of unreacted lye hiding in the bar just waiting to burn a customer's face off?
They licked it.
They licked it. They would take a cured bar of soap and touch it directly to the sensitive tip of their tongue. If it just tasted like soap, kind of waxy and gross. They knew it was fully saponified and safe. But if it zapped you, giving you a sharp stinging sensation, exactly like touching a 9-volt battery to your tongue, that meant there was active lye still in the bar and it was literally burning your taste buds.
That is just insane to me.
It's the ultimate definition of having skin in the game. But it perfectly illustrates a larger point. Soap is at its fundamental heart a product of violent chemistry. It is born from a very strong base, and that is exactly why true traditional soap is inherently alkaline. You cannot mathematically have a pH-balanced bar of real soap. If it is true soap, it is going to be a pH of 9 or 10, period.
So if I'm standing in the soap aisle at the grocery store looking at this massive wall of options, how do I even know what I'm buying? Because they certainly don't print warning, this is pH 10 on the label.
They definitely do not. But here's the general rule of thumb provided by the cosmetic chemists we sourced. If it is a solid hard bar and you flip it over and it lists ingredients like sodium palmate, sodium tallowate, or saponified oils, it is true alkaline soap. It will strip the acid mantle.
Okay, what about the liquid body washes in the plastic pump bottles?
Those are usually entirely different animals. We call those syndents, which is short for synthetic detergents. They actually aren't technically soap at all under the chemical definition. They are complex surfactants that are derived from petroleum or sometimes plant oils.
Now, the word synthetic usually sets off alarm bells for people. It sounds worse than natural soap.
It does sound worse, but in this specific biological case, it might actually be much better. Because they are synthesized in a lab, they can be precisely formulated to be any pH the chemist desires. They can be engineered to sit right at a perfect pH of 5.5 to completely match your skin's natural biology.
So scientifically speaking, the highly processed, unnatural synthetic liquid detergent might actually be far better for your skin's health than the artisanal, handcrafted, all-natural lye soap.
In terms of maintaining the integrity of the acid mantle, absolutely. This is where the whole natural fallacy really starts to crumble under scrutiny. A perfectly pH-balanced synthetic cleanser disturbs your microscopic ecosystem infinitely less than a beautifully packaged organic lye soap.
But there's always a catch, isn't there? The research mentions something called the mildness paradox.
There's always a catch in biology. We get very, very hung up on the pH number, but the overall formulation actually matters just as much. There was one fascinating study showing that a specific baby soap with a pH of 12.35, which is insanely alkaline, I mean, that is approaching the pH of household bleach, was actually proven to be less irritating to the skin than a different soap with a much lower pH of 9.
Wait, how is that physically possible if the pH is that high?
It entirely comes down to how the lipid molecules are structured within the formula. That particular baby soap likely utilized a technique called superfatting, where they intentionally leave a large surplus of free oils and fats in the bar that don't react with the lye. So when you wash with it, those extra oils instantly coat the skin and act as a physical buffer, protecting the acid mantle from the extreme alkalinity. So while pH is a fantastic guideline for shopping, it's not the only variable in the equation.
Okay, so we have thoroughly established that we are constantly stripping our acid mantle, but that our healthy bodies can usually recover given enough time and moisture. But what about the specific ingredients in these products that don't just wash off down the drain? What about the stuff that actually soaks into the systemic circulation of the body? Which brings us smoothly to Section 2, the endocrine disruptor experiment.
The Hermosa study? This is frankly a landmark piece of public health research.
So Hermosa is an acronym that stands for Health and Environmental Research on Makeup of Salinas Adolescents. It was a major study conducted out in Salinas, California.
Right. And what made it so unique is that it was a community-based participatory research study. The scientists didn't just parachute in and treat these people like lab rats. They actively worked with the local community to design and execute the protocol.
The subjects were specifically 100 Latina adolescent girls. Why target this specific demographic group for this kind of chemical study?
There were two main compelling reasons. First is that concept of the chemical burden we mentioned earlier in the intro. Teenage girls as a demographic use significantly more personal care products than any other group. They are the heavy users. Second, sociological data shows that women of color very often face much higher baseline exposure levels to certain specific chemicals like phthalates and parabens due to the specific types of cosmetic products heavily marketed to them, such as certain chemical hair relaxers or highly fragranced body sprays.
And adolescents in general are obviously in a highly critical developmental window biologically.
Exactly. Their bodies are literally flooded with natural hormones. They're actively developing their adult reproductive systems. If you introduce a synthetic chemical that mimics estrogen into the body at age 14, the potential for severe long-term developmental damage is theoretically much, much higher than if you introduce that exact same chemical at age 60 when the system is static.
So the intervention they designed was actually incredibly simple.
Yeah.
They didn't lock these girls in a sterile bubble for a month. They didn't overhaul their entire diet. They literally just swapped out their bathroom products.
For 3 days. That is the part of the methodology that still blows my mind. Just 3 short days. They took away their normal products and gave the girls low-chemical alternatives, basic products clearly labeled as being free of phthalates, parabens, triclosan, and oxybenzone.
And the urinalysis results after just those 3 days were an absolute aha moment for the researchers.
They were stunningly dramatic. The concentrations of these specific chemicals in the girls' urine dropped precipitously. We're talking massive clearance. Methylparaben levels dropped by about 44%. Propylparaben dropped by roughly 45%.
And what about triclosan? I know that used to be in every antibacterial soap on the market.
Triclosan dropped 36% across the entire cohort. But for the specific subset of girls who had actively been using a triclosan-based toothpaste every day and switched to a clean one, their levels plummeted by 70%.
70% in 3 days? That is massive. But honestly, I also find it incredibly empowering. It means these particular chemicals aren't acting like heavy metals. They aren't like lead or mercury that get permanently sequestered in your bone marrow forever.
Right. That is the silver lining here. These specific compounds have very short biological half-lives. Your liver and kidneys recognize them as foreign and actively want to get rid of them. If you just stop pouring them into the funnel at the top, your baseline levels drop very, very quickly.
And of course, there was a major twist in the Hermosa study. A real gotcha moment that I think perfectly highlights the absolute chaos of the modern cosmetic supply chain.
Ah, yes. The regrettable substitution.
Because while most of the targeted chemicals dropped beautifully, the urine levels of 2 very specific parabens, ethylparaben and butylparaben, actually significantly increased in the girls during the 3-day intervention.
Which is completely baffling at first glance, right? Because they were strictly using the clean, low-chemical replacement products hand-provided by the scientific researchers. So where on earth did these new parabens come from?
Was it just cross-contamination in the lab?
The researchers suspect it was either unintentional contaminations somewhere deep in the manufacturing supply chain, or, and this is the much scarier industry reality, it was a case of mislabeling or unannounced substitution. A cosmetic manufacturer might decide to swap out methylparaben because it's getting bad press and quietly replace it with ethylparaben, which consumers don't recognize yet. And they might not clearly declare it on the master ingredient list, or it might be hiding in a proprietary raw botanical blend that the brand itself purchased and didn't even fully understand.
It's essentially a giant game of chemical whack-a-mole. You smash down one concerning paraben and another slightly different one immediately pops up out of a different hole.
It really is. It practically proves that even with the absolute best intentions, even in a tightly controlled academic study, achieving true zero exposure in the modern world is incredibly difficult simply because the industrial supply chain is completely opaque to the end consumer.
So let's zoom out for a second to the macro level. Why are we so desperately trying to avoid these things in the first place? We constantly throw around this buzzword, endocrine disruptor. It certainly sounds bad, but biologically speaking, what is the actual mechanism? What is physically happening inside a human cell when these chemicals arrive?
Think of the endocrine system as your body's internal Wi-Fi network. It constantly sends wireless chemical signals, which we call hormones, from your major glands through the bloodstream to your individual cells to tell them exactly what to do and when. Grow now, ovulate now, store this energy as fat now, stop growing now.
And these synthetic chemicals basically hack the Wi-Fi router.
They absolutely spoof the signal. Let's take phthalates and parabens as prime examples. If you look at them on a molecular structural level, they actually look remarkably similar to the hormone estrogen. They have very similar shape. So they float through the bloodstream, they arrive at the cell, and they approach the estrogen receptor, which functions exactly like a physical lock on a door. Because their shape is so similar, they actually fit inside the keyhole. The receptor clicks, the cell unlocks. And the cell thinks, oh, hey, I just got an urgent message from the brain. I need to activate heavy estrogenic cellular activity right now.
But there was no actual message from the brain. It's a chemical hacker spoofing the signal.
It's a hacker. This dynamic creates massive amounts of what endocrinologists call estrogenic noise in the system. And depending on the timing of exposure, that noise can lead to a host of issues like early onset puberty in young girls, severe reproductive issues down the line, dropping sperm counts in men, and even complex metabolic disorders. In fact, some of these specific compounds are now being classified by researchers as obesogens, meaning they literally artificially signal the body to generate and fill more fat cells regardless of caloric intake.
That is genuinely terrifying. The literal idea that my morning body wash could be chemically programming my metabolic system to gain weight.
It is a hypothesis that is rapidly gaining significant traction and data in the peer-reviewed scientific community right now.
So how do we actually spot these hackers on the back of the bottle? This brings us to Section 3, the ingredient deep dive. And looking at our notes, the absolute biggest villain in the cosmetics aisle seems to be the word fragrance.
The fragrance loophole. It is without a doubt the ultimate black box of the modern beauty industry.
Why do we call it a loophole? How did it get there?
It historically stems from the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. In the United States, companies are legally allowed to aggressively protect their trade secrets, and the specific chemical recipe of a signature perfume or a proprietary scent profile is legally considered a highly valuable trade secret. So instead of forcing a company to list the 50 or even 100 distinct individual synthetic chemicals that make up the scent of their Tahitian vanilla body wash, the law says they can just print one single umbrella word on the label, fragrance, or sometimes parfum.
So that one single word is literally a legal Trojan horse.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It can legally hide thousands of completely undisclosed chemical ingredients, and very, very often that secret mixture heavily relies on phthalates.
Why phthalates specifically? I mean, do phthalates inherently smell good?
No, they don't have much of an odor at all. They are entirely functional ingredients. They act as heavy solvents and chemical fixatives. You know how a cheap teenage body spray completely fades away in 10 minutes, but a really expensive high-end department store perfume will last on your collar all day long? That's not magic, that's chemistry. That is a chemical fixative literally anchoring the volatile scent molecule to the keratin in your skin or hair so it can't evaporate. Phthalates are incredibly cheap and incredibly effective at doing exactly that.
So if I'm holding a bottle and I see the word fragrance in the ingredient list, and it doesn't explicitly have a badge on the front saying phthalate-free, I should just safely assume they're hiding in there.
It is a very, very safe bet. If a brand isn't loudly bragging about being free of phthalates on the marketing copy, they are almost certainly utilizing them in the formula because they are so cheap and effective.
This naturally leads us right into the natural trap. I think a lot of our listeners, and I am absolutely guilty of this myself, think, okay, this chemistry stuff is too hard. I'll just avoid all the long, unpronounceable chemical names entirely. I'll just buy the brown bottle with the essential oils, lemons, lavender, tea tree. Because natural is always better and natural is always safe, right?
The natural is safe fallacy. That is truly the biggest marketing catchphrase of the last decade. But we have to aggressively correct it here. Poison ivy is completely natural. Arsenic is natural. Asbestos is a natural mineral.
Okay. Fair point. Natural does not equal harmless.
Exactly. And in the specific world of skincare formulation, essential oils are not just gentle plant juices. They are incredibly potent, highly concentrated mixtures of volatile organic compounds. The research sources we pulled highlighted 3 very specific natural examples that are everywhere: citrilimone and linalool.
Right. These are the organic compounds that literally make lemons smell lemony and make lavender smell so relaxing.
Yes. But dermatologically speaking, they are also extremely well-documented allergens. And here is where the nuanced chemistry really bites you degradation. Let's take limone, for example. When it's sitting fresh in the intact peel of a lemon, it's actually a wonderful antioxidant. But when you extract it, put it in a plastic bottle, and then you physically open and close that bottle every single morning in a hot, steamy, humid shower, it is repeatedly exposed to oxygen and heat.
So it oxidizes, it spoils.
It oxidizes rapidly. It chemically converts into completely different compounds called hydroperoxides. And those specific oxidation byproducts are potent, severe skin irritants. They are known chemical sensitizers. So ironically, the all-natural, pure lemon body wash that has been sitting half empty on your shower shelf for 3 months might actually be causing far more active irritation and microscopic damage to your skin barrier than the boring, cheap synthetic stuff would.
Simply because the synthetic stuff is chemically stable.
Exactly. The synthetics are biologically boring. They just sit there. And sometimes when it comes to the delicate ecosystem of your skin barrier, you really want boring. You absolutely do not want highly reactive, active chemistry continually happening on your face.
Let's run through the rest of the list of baddies that the Momovation investigation so helpfully highlighted. We've thoroughly covered the parabens and the phthalates, but what about this category called formaldehyde releasers? I mean, formaldehyde sounds like something you only find in a mortuary or a high school biology dissection lab.
It is. Formaldehyde is a spectacularly effective preservative. It completely kills everything. It touches bacteria, mold, fungi, viruses. But a cosmetic chemist obviously cannot just pour liquid formaldehyde directly into a bottle of baby shampoo. First of all, it's a volatile gas at room temperature, it smells horrific, and crucially, it is a universally recognized known human carcinogen.
So what does the industry work around? How do they use it without using it?
Through incredibly clever chemistry, chemists synthesized a class of specialized ingredients. Look on your labels for long names like DMDM, hydantoin, imidazolidinylurea, or quaternium-15. These are essentially stable carrier compounds that happily sit in the water-based shampoo formula. But over time, as the product sits there, they purposely undergo a slow microscopic decomposition. And as they break down, they continuously release tiny, tiny microscopic amounts of free formaldehyde gas right into the liquid.
Just barely enough to continuously kill the ambient mold spores over a 2-year shelf life.
Yes, exactly. But technically speaking, it means you are intentionally applying a product that is actively off-gassing a known chemical carcinogen directly onto your warm, porous scalp. Now, the cosmetic industry strongly argues that the parts per million levels released are completely mathematically safe for human exposure. But again, we have to return to the concept of the cumulative chemical burden. If it's a tiny safe amount in your shampoo and a tiny safe amount in your daily conditioner and a tiny safe amount in your body wash and your face cream, it adds up fast.
Then we have the ethanolamines on the list, usually abbreviated as DEA, TTA, or MEA.
Right, these are specialized surfactants. They're specifically what makes the luxurious thick foam and bubbles that consumers absolutely demand. We psychologically love bubbles. But these specific nitrogen-based compounds have been repeatedly linked to organ system toxicity in various animal studies. And perhaps more importantly, from a formulation standpoint, they can easily react with other common nitrogen-based preservatives already sitting in the bottle to accidentally form entirely new compounds called nitrosamines.
And nitrosamines are
extremely potent carcinogens. Again, this is unintended rogue chemistry. The brand isn't maliciously adding cancer-causing agents to the soap on purpose, but they are mixing together stable chemicals that slowly interact and create them dynamically inside the bottle while it sits in the warehouse.
Honestly, listening to all of this, it feels completely overwhelming. It feels like you basically need a PhD in advanced organic chemistry just to safely buy a bar of soap at Target.
It is intentionally designed to be confusing to the average consumer. That opacity is exactly why the marketing tactic of greenwashing works so incredibly well.
Explain greenwashing in this specific cosmetic context.
Greenwashing is basically the dark art of making a product look incredibly safe and natural without actually changing the underlying chemical formulation. A massive conglomerate takes standard, cheap synthetic body wash. They put a stylized green fern leaf on the front label. They use a matte brown cardboard-looking texture for the packaging. They slap massive buzzwords on the front like clean, non-toxic, botanical, or pure.
But do any of those specific buzzwords actually mean anything in a legal regulatory sense?
Almost absolutely nothing. There is no strict FDA legal definition whatsoever for the term clean beauty. Honestly, I could go out back bottle raw petroleum gasoline and legally sell it as organic earth fuel if I wanted to, provided I could prove the carbon in the gasoline originally came from ancient decomposed ferns.
That is hilarious and horrible.
Yeah.
So is there a practical tool for the average listener? Or are we just totally helpless out here guessing in the aisles?
We definitely aren't helpless. The sources we reviewed extensively highlighted a really brilliant digital tool called Clearia. It functions as both a desktop browser extension and a mobile app.
How does it actually work in practice?
It's incredibly elegant. When you are shopping online, say you're browsing for a new moisturizer on Amazon or Sephora or whatever, the extension automatically scans the raw ingredient list text directly on the webpage. It then instantly cross-references all those impossible-to-pronounce chemical names against massive global regulatory databases, so it checks the official lists of known carcinogens, reproductive toxins, and banned allergens from the European Union, the state of California, the UN, etc.
And it actively flags them for you before you buy.
It flags them right on the screen. It pops up and says, hey, wait, this seemingly natural product actually contains a hidden paraben variant. Or, hey, this brand uses the generic term fragrance, which means undisclosed chemicals. It essentially outsources the organic chemistry degree so you don't have to memorize 50 different chemical synonyms.
That is a phenomenal pro tip. Everyone listening should probably go download Clearia right now. Okay, let's completely pivot our focus here to section 4. We are going to tackle one of the absolute most controversial products currently sitting in your bathroom, the battle of the armpit.
Deodorant. The sociological and technological history here is just wildly fascinating.
I really didn't realize how shockingly recent this specific invention was. According to the notes, the very first commercial deodorant ever sold was called Mum way back in the late 19th century.
1888 to be exact. Before that specific year, people everywhere just kind of smelled. Or if they were wealthy, they used heavy floral perfumes to awkwardly cover it up. But Mum was revolutionary because it was an active zinc-based cream that you applied.
And then the very first commercial antiperspirant was called EverDry, and that hit the market in 1903. But apparently applying it was an absolute nightmare. The formula was highly acidic, and it literally ate straight through people's clothing.
It was basically suspended in hydrochloric acid. It literally shredded the delicate cotton fabric of your shirts and dresses. But then a few decades later came a completely unrelated invention that changed everything, the ballpoint pen.
Wait, stop. Connect those dots for me. What on earth do ballpoint pens have to do with armpits?
So it was the late 1940s. The ballpoint pen was the hot new cutting-edge consumer technology. The mechanics of it, a tiny rotating sphere that smoothly distributed thick, viscous ink evenly across a surface without leaking. A very clever cosmetic chemist was staring at a pen one day and suddenly said, wait a minute, we can use that exact same delivery mechanism for armpit fluid. And boom, the roll-on deodorant applicator was instantly born.
That is genuine cross-industry innovation.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep, we really need to make a hard scientific distinction here that I think a lot of people totally miss. Deodorant versus antiperspirant. They are not just two words for the same thing.
They utilize two completely different biological mechanisms. To understand why, you actually have to understand the underlying biology of human sweat. And you totally dropped a bomb on me in the pre-show conversation about sweat being completely odorless.
I couldn't believe it when I read it.
It is entirely true. Humans basically have two main types of sweat glands. Endocrine sweat glands, which produce the watery stuff that pours down your forehead when you run a 5K, is basically just sterile salt water. Then you have apocrine sweat glands. These are densely clustered in the armpits and the groin. The sweat they pump out is thick, milky, and full of rich proteins and lipids. But crucially, when that apocrine sweat first exits the pore onto the skin, it has absolutely zero smell. None.
So where in the world does the horrific body odor actually come from?
It comes entirely from the local bacteria. Your underarm is essentially a microscopic tropical rainforest. It is constantly dark, it's very moist, and it's nice and warm. Huge colonies of bacteria naturally live there. When that rich apocrine sweat comes pumping out, the bacteria gorge themselves on those proteins and fats. They actively metabolize them. The pungent smell we call BO is strictly the volatile chemical byproduct of their bacterial digestion.
So to put it bluntly, body odor is basically just bacteria farts.
I really try to keep it highly scientific and dignified, but yes, it is metabolic waste gas. Microscopic bacteria farts trapped in your armpit.
Wow. So with that context, a deodorant product is specifically designed to work solely on the bacteria side of the equation.
Right. A pure deodorant actively kills the resident bacteria, usually utilizing things like denatured alcohol or traditionally triclosan, or it just heavily masks the inevitable smell with a strong synthetic fragrance. Crucially, a deodorant fully allows your body to continue sweating natural liquid, but it tries to chemically ensure that the resulting sweat doesn't smell bad.
An antiperspirant, on the other hand, does what?
An antiperspirant aggressively targets the physiological liquid itself. It targets the sweat gland. And to do this, it universally utilizes dissolved aluminum salts, usually compounds like aluminum chlorohydrate or aluminum zirconium.
How does the aluminum physically stop the water from coming out?
It's actually a fascinating localized chemical reaction. When those specific aluminum salts are applied and they encounter the electrolytes present in human sweat, they rapidly dissolve and undergo a distinct chemical change. They physically precipitate out of the liquid and form a solid gelatinous plug. They literally create a microscopic physical cork right inside the opening of the sweat duct.
It just violently plugs the hole.
It tightly plugs the hole. No liquid sweat gets out onto the surface. No liquid sweat means there is absolutely no food source for the local bacteria to eat. No food for the bacteria means no metabolic gas, which means no smell.
But this exact mechanism is where the massive modern health controversy completely explodes. Aluminum causes breast cancer. I feel like I hear this specific claim constantly on social media. Don't use heavy aluminum. It forcefully blocks your natural toxins from escaping and forces them to back up directly into your lymph nodes.
We really, really have to look closely at the hard objective data here, because this is arguably one of the most pervasive and stubborn medical myths in modern health culture. The National Cancer Institute, the US FDA, the highly strict European Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety, they have all independently funded and reviewed massive epidemiological studies on this exact specific topic for decades.
And what is the actual consensus?
The global scientific consensus is that there is absolutely no clear, credible evidence linking the daily use of standard aluminum antiperspirants to the development of breast cancer, period.
But hold on. People always confidently talk about the upper-outer quadrant phenomenon, the distinct anatomical idea that the vast majority of breast tumors are discovered right there near the armpit. To a layperson, that feels exactly like a smoking gun. I rub the aluminum stick right there every day, and 10 years later, the tumor grew right there. Cause and effect.
I completely understand why it feels viscerally like direct cause and effect, but it is actually just a fundamental misunderstanding of human anatomy. That specific upper-outer area of the breast, medically known as the tail of Spence, is simply where the vast anatomical majority of glandular breast tissue is physically located in the human body. The human breast isn't a perfectly symmetrical circle centered on the chest. It extends heavily up and outward into the axillary armpit region. So because there's physically exponentially more raw tissue, there are exponentially more individual cells there. More dividing cells naturally mean a much higher statistical probability of a random genetic mutation occurring in that specific zip code. It is purely a statistical reality of tissue volume, not a toxicological response to your secret deodorant.
Okay. That actually makes perfect logical sense. But what about the other major argument, the trapping toxins theory? The whole concept that if I forcefully artificially plug my sweat glands so I don't sweat the heavy metal toxins and chemicals circulating in my body, physically build up and get trapped inside my axillary lymph nodes.
This one is completely physiologically incorrect from the ground up. Your apocrine and endocrine sweat glands are not your kidneys. You do not medically detoxify systemic internal waste via human sweat. You systemically detoxify via your incredibly powerful liver and your kidneys, which filter blood into urine and through your digestive tract via defecation.
So sweating is strictly just for thermoregulation. It's just an AC unit.
99% of it is purely for evaporative cooling. Yes. The microscopic trace amounts of urea or heavy metals that might happen to randomly end up in sweat are statistically medically negligible. Artificially blocking a few localized sweat glands in your underarm absolutely does not cause a toxic heavy metal backup in your bloodstream. The biological systems are simply not plumbed together that way.
Okay, so the aluminum breast cancer risk is overwhelmingly likely a myth. But regardless of the data, there is still a absolutely massive multi-million-dollar market for aluminum-free natural deodorants right now. And I personally have several friends who absolutely swear by the crystal. You know what I'm talking about, the smooth rock.
Where's the crystal?
They feel so incredibly superior about it, too. They say things like, I don't use harsh, toxic lab chemicals on my body. I just rub this pure natural earth salt rock on my pits.
This is hands down my absolute favorite bit of chemical irony in the entire cosmetic industry. What do you think that magically pure natural rock is actually made of?
I mean, the package usually just vaguely says natural mineral salts.
Right. But if you look at the actual specific chemical composition of those mineral salts, it is almost universally a compound called potassium alum.
Potassium alum. Wait a minute.
Which is the common shorthand chemical name for potassium aluminum sulfate.
Wait, are you seriously telling me that the famous, expensive, aluminum-free natural crystal deodorant literally contains pure aluminum?
It is functionally 100% a solid block of an aluminum salt.
You have got to be kidding me.
I am absolutely not kidding. Now, in the interest of complete scientific fairness to the crystal rock manufacturers, the specific molecular chemistry of alum is slightly different than the chlorohydrate used in Degree or Dove. The distinct aluminum molecules in the crystal salt are physically much larger in size. Because they are so large, they are theoretically much too big to easily penetrate the outer skin barrier, and more importantly, they do not effectively form that gelatinous physical plug inside the sweat duct, which is exactly why the rock crystal is legally classified as a deodorant and not an antiperspirant. You will still physically sweat while using it. The salt just creates a highly hostile, salty surface environment that instantly dehydrates and kills the local bacteria.
So it does effectively kill the odor, but it is categorically, fundamentally not aluminum-free.
Correct. If your explicit personal health goal is to be 100% aluminum-free because you are deeply personally terrified of the elemental metal called aluminum, the natural crystal is an objective catastrophic fail. It is a massive, wildly successful marketing sleight of hand.
That is just incredible. I'm going to have to break some hearts at my next dinner party. So with all that said, if the baseline aluminum data shows it is broadly safe, why would anyone deliberately choose to go aluminum-free in the first place?
Pure personal preference and comfort. Some people have highly sensitive skin and are legitimately locally allergic to aluminum salts. It can cause severe contact dermatitis, angry red rashes, or chronic itchiness for a subset of the population. And some people just genuinely prefer the natural physical sensation of allowing their body to sweat normally. And that is totally, completely fine. But you should make that specific choice because you personally prefer the way it feels, not because a viral video convinced you that you are actively preventing systemic cancer by switching. Base your consumer choices on personal comfort, not on manufactured fear.
That is fantastic advice. Let's zoom way out for our final section today. Section 5, the history of hygiene. Because when we look around at all this modern stuff, the loofahs, the 10-step facial scrubs, the clinical strength deodorants, it inherently feels so totally normal to us. We assume humans have always tried to be this clean. But looking at the historical timeline, this behavior is barely a blip.
It is a radically recent social invention. If you had a time machine and went back to, say, 1840s America, you would find yourself in a very, very deeply smelly country. But the fascinating sociological twist is that they genuinely didn't think they were smelly at all.
They just didn't care about the odor.
It wasn't just apathy, no. They actually believed that physical dirt and body grease was medically good for you. There was a massively prevailing mainstream medical theory at the time called the miasma theory, which essentially posited that all disease and plague was directly caused by breathing in bad, diseased air. Miasma.
Okay, so how did being incredibly dirty physically protect you from the bad air?
Well, the doctors of the era believed that fully submerging your naked body in a tub of hot, warm water would unofficially open up all your skin pores. And they theorized that having wide-open, clean pores would freely allow the deadly airborne miasma to seep directly into your internal organs and instantly kill you. So conversely, they genuinely believed that maintaining a thick, undisturbed, superficial layer of natural body grease, dead skin and grime safely sealed the pores. It was viewed as a vital protective biological shield against the plague.
That is wild. So when did that massive societal paradigm finally shift? When did we collectively decide to start intensely scrubbing off the shield?
The massive tipping point was the American Civil War. Suddenly, you had huge, unprecedentedly large groups of young men violently packed together, living in incredibly close, squalid quarters in army camps. Dysentery, cholera, and severe wound infections were absolutely rampant. And this conveniently historically coincided directly with the radical rise of the germ theory of disease over in Europe, spearheaded by pioneers like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister. We finally mathematically realized, oh wait, it isn't the invisible bad air, it's these microscopic physical bugs.
So the military doctors finally started explicitly telling people to wash their hands with hot water and lye soap.
Exactly. The Union Army officially mandated strict new camp hygiene and bathing standards to stop the spread of dysentery. When the war finally ended and those millions of surviving soldiers went back home to their farms and cities, they brought that radical new daily washing habit right back with them. And then almost immediately, the Madison Avenue advertising executives took the reins.
The infamous body odor ad campaigns of the early 20th century.
Yes. In the early 1900s, aggressive corporate advertisers quickly realized they could sell exponentially more blocks of commercial soap if they actively made the general population feel deeply socially insecure. They literally invented the terrifying acronym BO to make it sound like an official medical disease. They relentlessly ran terrifying magazine ads explicitly telling young women that if they smelled even vaguely like a normal biological human being, they would be social pariahs and would absolutely never find a husband.
And it clearly worked beyond their wildest dreams. But now looking closely at the modern dermatological data, we might have actually swung the heavy pendulum entirely too far in the completely opposite direction.
We definitely undoubtedly have. The Momavation article we reviewed pointed out a crazy real estate statistic: almost 1 in 4 new houses currently built in America after the year 2005 has 3 or more completely dedicated full bathrooms. We have become a culture totally pathologically obsessed with total daily body sanitization.
And what exactly is the clinical medical consequence of this constant chronic overhygiene?
It leads directly into what immunologists call the hygiene hypothesis. By constantly living in heavily sterilized, bleached indoor environments and constantly stripping our outer skin barrier with harsh antimicrobial synthetic soaps twice a day, we are seeing a massive, terrifying statistical rise in chronic allergies, severe adult eczema, and complex systemic autoimmune issues.
We've basically completely bored our own immune systems.
We've bored them to tears.
Ugh.
Without millions of real, dangerous microbial enemies to constantly fight off and practice on every day, the highly complex human immune system gets confused and paranoid. It starts aggressively attacking totally harmless ambient things like tree pollen or peanut protein, or in the case of autoimmune eczema, it literally attacks our own healthy skin cells. We are unknowingly aggressively waging a daily chemical war on the very commensal bacteria, our native microbiome that spent millions of years evolving specifically to physically protect us.
Man, this has been quite the journey today. We've gone all the way from the logarithmic mathematical pH of our outer skin layers to the deceptive marketing of crystal salt rocks, right down to the bizarre medical history of the American bathtub. So to bring it all home, what does this massive info dump actually mean for the average listener who is just going to be standing naked in their shower tomorrow morning, staring blankly at all their plastic bottles?
I think we can easily boil all this complex data down to 4 very practical, clear takeaways.
So hit me with them.
Number 1, respect the pH. Deeply understand that your healthy skin is naturally acidic, sitting at a 5.5, and that traditional bar soap is highly alkaline, sitting at a 9 or 10. If you absolutely love that tight, squeaky clean feeling on your face, know that biologically squeaky actually just means fully stripped of vital lipids. Consider actively switching to a synthetic Scindent liquid or a specifically low pH gentle cleanser, especially if you suffer from chronically dry skin or eczema.
Number 2, chemicals absolutely matter. The Salinas Formosa study is the absolute definitive proof of that. You are not a helpless victim to the industry. You can actively lower your internal circulating levels of endocrine-disrupting parabens and triclosan in just 3 short days. Start reading the back labels. Actively try to avoid the 3 Ps, parabens, phthalates, and PEGs.
Number 3, please be aware of the massive natural halo effect. Just because a bottle has a beautiful green leaf graphic and claims to use botanical essential oils does not automatically mean it is biologically safe for your specific skin. Remember the rapidly oxidizing lemon oil we talked about? If you have highly sensitive or reactive skin, buying a boring, stable, synthetic, fragrance-free product is almost always significantly safer and gentler than a highly volatile natural scent.
And finally, number 4, don't sweat the sweat. Using daily deodorant or antiperspirant is entirely a personal cosmetic choice. It is not a required medical one. The terrifying global aluminum breast cancer link is simply not clinically supported by the broad scientific consensus. But remember, the crystal rock being totally aluminum-free is also a complete marketing myth. Choose whatever specific product functionally works best for your body and your lifestyle, but critically base that choice on your own physical comfort and not on internet fear-mongering.
Exactly. Beautifully summarized.
Thank you. Well, I want to leave everyone listening with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on today. We all naturally tend to think of ourselves as a single, solitary individual being. I am me. But mathematically, biologically speaking, we are actually a sprawling, crowded planet. We are a massive walking host ship to trillions of individual microscopic organisms that peacefully live out their entire lives on the surface of our skin.
We are essentially a walking, breathing coral reef.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And for the last 50 to 60 years, driven heavily by corporate advertising, we've effectively been willingly dumping harsh chemical bleach on our own coral reef every single morning. So here is the ultimate question. If we just stopped, if we totally stopped the insane 17-product daily regimen, if we stopped desperately trying to smell like a synthetic midnight ocean breeze and just step back and let our body's own ancient natural acidic chemistry actually do the job it evolved to do, would we as a society actually be significantly physically healthier?
It's an incredibly scary social experiment for a modern, civilized human to actually try. But looking objectively at the deep biology and the microbiology data we covered today, I genuinely think your skin barrier would ultimately thank you for it.
Definitely something profound to mull over tomorrow while you're standing there squinting at the tiny ingredient list on the back of your favorite shampoo bottle. Go check your labels, folks. Definitely go download that Cleary app we talked about to make it easy. But whatever you do, please don't stress yourself out too much in the shower.
Yeah, chronic cortisol stress is terrible for your skin barrier, too.
Very true. Well, thank you so much for diving into all this complex chemistry with us today.
It was an absolute pleasure.
We will see you all next time for another deep dive right here on Mon Saint-Marie.